Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Dread Time Stories. I'm your host, Dr. Phobia. And tonight, dear patients, our story this evening tells of the spooky things that can happen on Halloween. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's tale, Halloween Props. It was Halloween, and a young man named Robert was driving home from work. Every house he passed was decorated with Halloween props, like carved pumpkins, plastic skeletons, black paper bats, and witches on broomsticks. It reminded him of all the fun he had had as a child, going from house to house to trick or treat. Distracted by all the Halloween decorations, he missed his turnoff and had to take the long way back to his house. The light was growing dim, and the road was filled with twists and turns. As he came around a sharp corner, his car skidded on some loose gravel. He lost control and slid off the road and plowed into a ditch. A few moments later, Robert was dazed and just sat in his car, trying to regain his senses. After making sure he wasn't hurt, he got out and surveyed the damage. Apart from a few scratches, the car looked fine. The main problem is that the car was stuck in a ditch and the rear wheels were raised a few inches from the ground. He would have to call a tow truck. Robert checked his pockets and discovered to his dismay that he had left his phone at work. Now he was in the middle of nowhere and had to find a phone. He waited for a few minutes, but when no cars passed, he decided to start walking. About a mile down the road, he finally spotted a house in the distance. He came to the gates. There was an old rusted truck sitting in the driveway. The door of the truck was wide open, swinging in the breeze. There was no one inside, so he continued up to the house. It was an old, dilapidated building. Some of the shutters were hanging off the windows. There was just something eerie about the silence of this house. The only thing he could hear was the beating of his own heart and the low whistle of the cold October wind. Every now and then, a weather vane on the roof creaked as it swung around. Robert knocked on the door a few times, but there was no answer. He was about to give up and try to find another house when he noticed something unusual. On the other side of the house, there were some Halloween props and decorations. One of them was a rocking chair with a ragged scarecrow sitting on it. The scarecrow was wearing a skeleton mask, and as he got closer, he noticed a putrid smell. Stopping in his tracks, he stared at the scarecrow. Something just didn't look right. Between the clumps of straw, he thought he could see something that looked almost like human skin. Filled with a strange mix of fear and curiosity, he reached slowly and pulled at the straw. As it fell apart, he was horrified to discover that underneath the straw was a dead body. The skin was purple and it was decomposing. Robert was still trying to recover from the shock when he heard footsteps from the back of the house. "Who's there?" said a voice. An old man emerged from behind the house, and as soon as he spotted Robert, he stared in surprise. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" he cried. Robert's voice was trembling. There's a dead body," he croaked. The old man rushed over and examined the scarecrow. Pulling at the straw, he revealed the disgusting face of a rotting older woman. "Millie!" shouted the old man, his voice shaking. "Millie, what happened?" He turned to Robert, his eyes filling with tears. "Help me carry her into the house," he cried. Robert didn't know what to do. The man lifted her by the shoulders, and Robert picked up her feet, and together they carried her up the front steps into the house. They brought her into an empty room and laid her down on the cold wooden floor. "Stay here, while I go call the police," the man shouted. Before Robert had the chance to reply, the man was hurrying down the corridor. Robert stood there, still shaking, staring down at the old woman lying at his feet. After a while, he looked around and realized there was no furniture. This house seemed to be completely bare, and it was covered with cobwebs. There weren't even any light bulbs in the fixtures. He waited and waited, and the old man never returned. After 20 minutes had passed, he decided to go find the old man. But as soon as he walked down the corridor, he saw the phone. It was lying on the floor at the end of the corridor, and the line had been ripped from the wall. With a growing sense of unease, he cautiously explored the rest of the house. There was no sign of the old man. Robert began to panic and ran out the back door. He didn't know where he was going, but he just kept running. After about a half an hour, he came to a small general store that lay by the side of the road. Bursting into the shop, sweat pouring down from his brow, he begged the shocked young woman behind the counter to call the police. She asked him what was wrong, and he was so out of breath he couldn't even answer. Exhausted from all the running, he sat down on the floor and tried to calm himself. When the police finally arrived, Robert told them what had happened. He had gotten to the back of the patrol car and directed them to the old, dilapidated house. The officers went in and spent 20 minutes searching it from top to bottom. They didn't find anything. There was no dead body and no old man. The house had been vacant for years. The truck in the driveway had been abandoned almost a decade ago. Robert kept insisting that he had seen the dead body with his own eyes, and he gave a description to the police of the old man, but it was clear that they didn't believe him. A few days later, Robert went to the police station and asked if they had come up with any information on the old man. The officer gave him a strange look and said, "Actually, we did. We checked the property records to see who owned the house, and we did a little asking around." "Well, that's great," Robert said. "Well, what did you find?" "Well, there was an old man that used to live in that house. He seemed like he fit your description. He had a wife, too. She disappeared and nobody heard from her again. Some people suspected that he had murdered her and buried her in the yard, but there was never any real evidence. Just a lot of loose talk and rumors spread by the locals. Nothing concrete, up until now." "Well, have you arrested him?" said Robert. "Well, we'd like to," said the policeman, "but there's one problem." "And what's that?" Robert asked. The policeman gave a wiry smile and said, "He died in 2003 on Halloween night." Well, there you have it, dear patients. That was Halloween Props. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for listening. Like I always say in closing, check under your bed, look in your closet, and sleep with the light on. The life you save may very well be your own. Good night, everyone.